I'm speaking to you today not as a storyteller or a motivational speaker, but as a 32-year-old American woman whose life split cleanly into a before and after on a single ordinary morning. And if my voice shakes or my eyes drift away from the camera, it's because some memories still feel too large to fit into words. But I promised myself I would finally tell this story out loud because silence almost swallowed me whole, and I don't want it to swallow anyone else. So here it is, all of it, in one breath. Because that's how it still feels when I think about that day. Like my lungs never quite recovered. I grew up in a normal American family. The kind you see in holiday commercials and take for granted when you're inside it. A dad who worked with his hands and smelled like sawdust and aftershave. A mom who remembered everyone's birthdays and believed dinner together mattered even when we were tired. A younger brother who teased me mercilessly and would still show up at my apartment at midnight if I called. And a little sister who believed the world was wide and kind and waiting for her. And for most of my life I assumed that love like that was permanent. That it was part of the structure of the universe. Something solid I could lean on while I chased my career and postponed phone calls and said, next time, more often than I should have. And the trip that took them from me was supposed to be one of those joyful milestones we tell ourselves we'll make time for later. My parents' anniversary, my sister's first big adventure, my brother's long-delayed vacation. And I remember standing in my kitchen days before they left, half listening as my mom talked about the weather and the hotel and how excited she was. And I remember saying I couldn't come because work was crazy and flights were expensive and there would be other chances. And I remember the way my dad said, "We'll bring you back something nice." And I didn't know that sentence would become a blade I would replay in my head for years. The morning of the crash I was doing nothing memorable at all. Brushing my teeth, checking emails, mentally complaining about a meeting I didn't want to attend. When my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize and I ignored it because that's what we do now. We assume everything important will leave a message. But it rang again and something in my chest tightened before I even answered. And when the voice on the other end asked my name and mentioned a flight number I didn't recognize at first, my brain refused to connect the dots because it was too early and too normal, and tragedies don't announce themselves politely. And when the words, "There has been an accident," and "No survivors," finally landed, they didn't explode the way movies show you. They hollowed me out quietly, like someone scooping the center out of a house and leaving the walls standing. And I remember sliding down the cabinet onto the floor and thinking very clearly that this must be a mistake because my family doesn't disappear. Because love like that doesn't just end. And the hours that followed were a blur of sirens and hospital waiting rooms and kind strangers and paperwork and questions I couldn't answer. And I learned very quickly that shock is not numbness but disbelief stretched so thin it becomes fragile. And when the confirmation came, final and undeniable, something inside me cracked in a way that never fully healed. The funeral was 4 caskets lined up like punctuation marks ending a sentence I wasn't ready to finish. And people told me I was strong because I stood there and spoke and didn't collapse. But the truth is I was empty. I was operating on muscle memory because if I had let myself feel even a fraction of the loss I was carrying I would have shattered into something unrecognizable. And in the weeks after, the world did the cruelest thing it can do to someone in grief. It kept going, traffic moved. Stores opened, people complained about weather and deadlines and minor inconveniences. And I wanted to shake them and scream that nothing mattered anymore because my family was gone. But instead I smiled and nodded and learned how to exist among the living while feeling like a ghost. Survivor's guilt crept in quietly at first and then all at once, convincing me that I had failed some invisible test. That if I had gone on the trip or insisted on a different flight or called one more time somehow the universe would have rearranged itself. And nights were the worst because silence leaves room for imagination. And I replayed my last conversations with each of them until their voices felt both painfully close and impossibly far away. I avoided airports and avoided families laughing in public and avoided mirrors because the person looking back at me felt like a stranger who had stolen someone else's life. Friends try to help but grief isolates you in a way that's hard to explain. Because no one else is carrying exactly what you're carrying. And even kindness can feel exhausting when you're just trying to breathe. Months passed and then years and people stopped asking how I was doing. Not because they didn't care but because time teaches the world to move on. And I learned that grief doesn't shrink. It changes shape, Some days it sits quietly in the corner and other days it fills the entire room. And the hardest lesson was accepting that surviving is not a betrayal. That loving deeply does not obligate you to stop living. And it took a long time to understand that holding on to their memory didn't mean holding on to pain forever. It meant allowing their love to continue shaping who I am. And the reason I'm telling this story now, looking into a camera instead of whispering into the dark, is because I know someone watching this is carrying their own unbearable loss and wondering if life will ever feel real again. And I won't lie to you and say everything gets better or that you'll wake up one day without the ache. But I will tell you this, you learn to carry it. You learn that joy and grief can exist in the same breath. You learn that your heart can break and still keep beating. And 3 years later I still talk to my family out loud. I still say their names, I still look at the sky when planes pass overhead. But I'm here, breathing, living, choosing to stay, and if you're watching this, so are you, and that matters more than you know. Because loving and losing is the price of being human. And surviving is not weakness. It's proof that love leaves a mark deep enough to change you forever. And if my story does anything at all, I hope it reminds you that even after the sky falls, even after the unimaginable happens, there is still a way forward. Not because the pain disappears, but because you grow strong enough to walk with it. And that strength, quiet and unglamorous and deeply human, is how I honor the family I lost and the life I am still learning how to live.